You're listening to Not So Live from Asteroid G, here from a far-off galaxy. I'm your host, Mike Finkelstein.
And I'm Mike the Ghoul, going to talk some sci-fi movie rankings and our opinions on what this list is, and we'll interject some better ones.
So I was looking around, we were trying to figure out what to talk about for this particular podcast, and sometimes we do lists, and we were going to discuss the downfall of the DCEU, but one of the two of us on this podcast still hasn't watched the latest Aquaman film. So
I've seen like 10 minutes of it, and I was like, all right, I'm interested, and then I forgot to watch it again. I'm going to do that soon, I promise.
So we decided to fill in instead with a list of sci-fi movies, the top 10. And I found a list on Empire. I scrolled until I found something that looked interesting, and this was the one that came up. And honestly, I probably should have kept scrolling and found a different list. Because this one, while it has some movies on there I would probably put on a list, I almost steadfastly disagree with everything on here in the order it's on here and the choices they made and everything else. I'm just like, why? Why?
I'll say that, like, 10 movies on here, 10 good movies.
Sure.
I would say...
Sure. Top 10?
4 of these, maybe 5, belong on this list, and the other 6, I'm like, okay, sure.
So let's go over the list itself first, and then I think we need to spend more time on honorable mentions and things we would have put in here instead than the actual list itself, because I could probably create a top 10 list, and maybe only 2 or 3 of these would be on here, and a whole bunch of other shit would be on instead. So...
Yeah. You're going to notice one thing that's omitted completely that's very questionable.
Oh, like the second we go over the list, you're going to be sitting there going, why isn't there any representation on this? Now, in fairness, caveat, this was a top 50. We're only covering the top 10. But considering what's in the top 10, there are noticeable omissions that I think they were using the other 40 to try and cover for. Yeah. And I disagree with that as well. But number 10 is E.T. the Extraterrestrial.
I had a double take on this one.
I know. Like... So, you pick a Steven Spielberg alien movie, and you don't pick Close Encounters of the Third Kind as his top alien movie. Like, E.T. is a good film for a family alien film, and it's very heartwarming, and it got people really into Reese's Pieces. But really? This over Close Encounters as the one Steven Spielberg in your top 10? Really?
I question that entirely.
Yeah.
As far as like alien-based movies, sure, E.T. is about an alien, but Close Encounter is far superior as a movie that's about alien anything.
E.T. has a drunk, like, cancerous lump that wanders around, like, while Close Encounters has a dude that makes a mashed potato, like, mountain. Of the two, I know what I'm choosing,
Very, like, the human aspect in Close Encounters of, like, what it's doing to his family, too. And Richard Dreyfuss just absolutely nailing everything about that movie.
No, like, E.T. is fine. E.T. is no Close Encounters. I'm sorry.
Yeah, I'm already going to put Close Encounters in a separate little tab here. That's one that should probably be on here.
Right? Come on! Number 9 is Aliens, which... Okay, representation for this series is good. When I was going over the list and I saw Aliens in the top 10, I'm like, okay, if this is our representation for this franchise, perfect. This is the one I would go. We're not done with this franchise. Just spoiler alert already. But Aliens is a great movie. James Cameron deserves to be on this list. He's made a lot of good movies. He took the concept of Alien and made it into something bigger and more militaristic and awesome. I love Aliens. It's been on our lists before. This is a good film.
Yeah, we've talked about this one several times, and the debate between, the sequel versus the original, what's better, and they both stand alone, I think is what we agree on as fantastic movies. But I think overall, the Aliens is superior in many ways to Alien. And we've talked about it, and the action is bigger, the threat is bigger, the cast is bigger, everything is bigger, and usually not always bigger is better, but Cameron finds a way to make bigger better every time.
That was his whole point, and he did it right. He went into that pitch meeting, wrote down Alien, and then put a $sign at the end. It's like, there's your movie. And that's what he gives, and he delivered the $signs, okay?
Oh, my God. That's an amazing way to put it. I could see him doing that, that was his pitch. That's so
great.
Good.
It was great. Number 8, Back to the Future. Now, okay. I'm starting to notice a bias here, and the bias is movies of a very specific generation made this list. And Back to the Future is, again, it's a good film. It's a fun science fantasy comedy. But
Mhm.
like the science fiction part of it is very minimal and it's very hand waved away, while most of this movie is what I would consider a 1950s celebration.
I guess because the movie overall is about time travel,
Yeah,
sure, but
yeah.
I love this movie,
It
and
is a
this
good movie.
belongs
I like this
nowhere
movie.
near a top 10 list of
No,
sci-fi movies.
no.
I love it, and I cannot defend it to that extent.
See, my issue is if you put Back to the Future on this list, then because it's quote unquote time travel, then
Mhm.
you also have to now start thinking about Bill and Ted's Excellent Adventure. Because
Yeah.
it is just as sci fi as Back to the Future, which means neither of them are really sci fi, you know?
Yep.
Terminator 2 Judgment Day sits at number 7. It is, I will note, the only Terminator representation in the top 10. And
Mhm.
I mean, I'm torn on this because this is definitely a situation where I don't feel like you have even the formula for Terminator 2 without Terminator. It is the
Mhm.
bigger, better, more bombastic version, but I don't know if it's the one of the two that I would put on the list.
You got, Cameron doing Cameron
Cameron doing
things
Cameron. Yeah,
again right
yeah.
here. As a science fiction movie, I think that Terminator brought a little bit more to
Yeah,
the table than Terminator 2.
yeah.
The bigger action, sure, the bigger threat again, of course, the T-1000, the liquid metal, like, we hadn't seen this kind of special effects on screen before. So if you're talking about like a cinematography angle and whatever, like, okay, I can see it, but the movie itself, if you're just going off the sci-fi aspect, to your point, you don't have Terminator 2 without Terminator,
Yeah.
and that was just overall like a much more grittier movie, and it felt more science fiction than almost the polish of a Terminator 2.
I think that's the key point that I that you're making that I agree with and why I would struggle to put Terminator 2 on this list. If we were doing top action movies, Terminator
Hmm.
2 is the one. But if
Right.
we're talking sci-fi, more sci-fi development, more discussion about causality and the future and your fate and like the inevitable time loop and everything, all
Hmm.
of that is in Terminator 1.
Yeah,
That's the
and
one
you
that's
don't
sci-fi.
have that in Terminator 2
No,
without Terminator 1.
yeah, no, you need all that sci-fi setup so you can do the action of Terminator 2, but the
Yeah.
sci-fi setup comes in the first movie. Terminator should be on this list, this top 10, more than Terminator 2 should be.
Yeah, I think that's fair to say. And
Mhm.
they're both quality films. Like, you
Mhm.
want to put them near any top 10 list, I really can't argue with that. But on this certain aspect, it's hard when we did the sequels versus originals to find a way to put Terminator above Terminator 2 sometimes, but I think we just found a way.
The one way is,
Yeah.
are we talking specifically sci-fi development? Then it's the
Yeah.
first one, like hands
Yeah.
down.
Yeah, agreed.
Number 6 is Star Wars, and I can see having one of these films on this list. Spoiler, we're going to be
Mhm.
discussing this again.
Mhm.
And that irritates me greatly. But I can see having Star Wars on this list. Like
Mhm.
it redefined alongside Jaws, which is not
Mhm.
sci-fi. It
Mhm.
redefined the summer blockbuster experience. You have to
Sure.
represent Star Wars somewhere on here. I get it.
Mhm.
And whether it's Star Wars or The Empire Strikes Back, one of these films need to make this list. I'm they're both sci-fi. I don't even have to justify why they're sci-fi. It has space wizards and shit, sure, but
Yeah,
it's
lasers in space. It's
sci-fi
fine.
space wizards.
Yeah.
Um, I mean, personally, I would only put Empire on the list if I was going to have one, and it's a
Right.
top 10. I kind of feel like I don't want to put two of them on the list.
It feels almost like a safe way to
Mm-hmm.
kind of round out your top 10. Like, look, one of these things is not like the other, so let's put them both in.
Which
Um,
they do, which annoys
which
me.
which they do.
Which they do.
And New Hope is good. It's a
Yeah.
really good flick. It sets things up. When the credits roll, like I wasn't born when it came out initially, but I remember
No, I
watching it
wasn't
as a
either.
kid and always feeling like it was strange, like in the credit roll, like what's episode 4? Like where's 1, 2, and 3? Why are we starting in the middle? Like there was some intrigue and everything behind it, but as far as a good movie, like we're not going to spoil too far ahead, but there's a better Star Wars movie
Yeah,
than this one.
there is. Uh, which and there's better sci-fi in general. Like if we're talking hardcore sci-fi, the next one, 2001: A Space Odyssey at number 5. I okay, so I don't like this movie. I think 2/3 of it are great, and then that
Yeah.
last space baby section just completely loses me. But it's hard sci-fi. Like I do not argue. Like there are a lot of fans of this movie. I do not argue with putting this movie on this list. it wouldn't make my personal top 5, but I 100% can justify seeing why it's in a top 10, you know?
I agree.
Yeah.
It's very, I've seen this movie twice
Me
over
too.
my life, and
Hmm.
each time I've seen it, it feels very, filmed in the '60s with
Yes.
the best effects they can get at
Hmm.
the time. And I'm not smashing that at all. It's just a difficult watch with some of the things you see nowadays. But I mean, you want to put Kubrick on this list? I get it. That's another legendary director who should probably have some representation here. I mean, 2001. It was very much a movie that it kind of defined a lot of what sci-fi was at the time. Like, I mean, I get it. It wouldn't be on my top 10 list personally, but I can see why it would be on such a list as this, I
Yeah.
guess is what I'm getting at.
Yeah, and that's the thing. Like when we look at this list, and we'll touch upon this again, most of this list is obviously favorites of like Gen X. It feels
Yeah.
like that's what this is. Movies of their generation, and maybe a little bit of Gen like Zennials to come after. But like it's very Gen Xy in its choices. This is the only one that's on the list that came from before that generation, and I feel
Yeah.
like this is on here because this is the one hard sci-fi film that they were like, well, we need to throw a bone and say that this isn't just our movies, but is actual sci-fi movies. You know?
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. So this one made the cut. I think I'd make the cut like on any like top movies of sci-fi in general because you got to have the one hard sci-fi. This is the
Mhm.
hardest one I can think of to put on here.
Yeah, and it's another one of those movies. Like, I think Hal as a villain also
Hal's
kind of
great.
makes, Hal,
Yeah.
like, the computer is the best part of the movie.
Hmm.
There's some great human element in there and some great, shots and all that. It's very well done, but again, it's very old.
It is. And then somehow Tablet and Space Baby, and I'm so confused.
I don't know. The ending always confused me,
Yeah.
and I still don't,
It's very
understand it. But
60s.
I'll just say the movie's good.
Number 4 with The Matrix. I actually don't hate having a Matrix movie on here, and this is the only one
Yeah.
of them. And like, there are some people out there going, "What do you mean this is the only one of the Matrix movies out there? There's only one." Um,
Yeah,
I personally, I think The Matrix could have ended with the first one, and I would have been perfectly happy with it. I feel like the other movies have diluted the legacy of the film.
it was a movie that, like, I remember when a sequel came out to it, I was surprised. I
Hmm.
was like, "Oh, this was a really good movie. They're making another one. Cool, I'm here for it." And
Doesn't need
again, it
it.
was
Yeah.
it didn't need it. I felt it was a good movie, and I
Yeah.
think that we should do a thing on the Matrix too. Throw that
Sure.
in the back burner. We'll talk about that. I think overall those are pretty good movies. If you're gonna throw one on here, this is fine. Again, this is another one of those sci-fi movies that did some really unique things with the shooting and the cinematography and the special effects that kind of really weren't
Yeah.
seen
It was
at the
it was
time.
a generational defining movie for sci-fi
Yeah.
action.
So putting that out there, like, again,
Hmm.
I feel that's almost like Terminator 2 on this list for the reasons that don't entirely make it sci-fi. I guess, like, the whole agents and the whole control of the
The
robots and
setup.
like we're batteries kind of
Yeah.
thing.
The whole
There's some
setup.
good sci-fi elements in there, sure, but I don't know. It's a great movie. Again, I like it, but I'm not so sure if it belongs on a top 10 list of sci-fi. But I could see why it's on this list again.
I think it'd make my list because it's one of those sci-fi movies that I will watch over and over again. And like
Yeah,
the whole first and first act, first and a half acts are all about setting up the sci-fi aspects of it. Then it does become very much action in a sci-fi world
yeah,
from that
yeah.
point forward. But there's a lot of sci-fi development in it. It's some of it you have to hand wave away, but it is.
Yeah,
I
it's a very good movie
It's
too.
a very
Don't
good
get me
movie.
wrong.
It
Yeah.
is. It is, and it doesn't need sequels. I'm just
No,
saying that
it
again.
didn't.
It
And
didn't.
we'll get that
We'll get
another
there.
time. I
Yeah.
think the sequels themselves are good. I think
Mm.
rewatching,
Mm.
and we'll cover it again later on. But
Mhm.
I was not as disappointed as I was the first times rewatching them. Maybe I'm just trying to be nostalgic. Anyway, moving on.
So now we get to Empire Strikes Back at number 3, which, as we said, there were 2 Star Wars movies on here. That is a
Mhm.
point of contention we'll discuss.
Yeah,
This is the one of the 3 that I would put on here. The later Star Wars and other stuff. Now, Empire's the
yeah.
one that you put on here. Sure, you need the setup of Star Wars. That's why you make a list of top 50. You put Star Wars somewhere down near the bottom.
Mhm.
Empire's up at the top. You only need one Star Wars in here.
Yeah.
Empire's the better movie.
It really is. I would, put Empire on a list of top 10 movies, period, not even just sci-fi
Mm.
of all time. I think there's some great elements in this movie. The way it ends always just stuck with me. Like it ends on a down note, like almost hopeful, but also very sad. Hans and Carbonite, they're going to go find him. They fly away in the Millennium Falcon. Luke's watching with one hand with Leia in his arms, like, just finding out their sisters, siblings, and whatnot. Like there's just so much good shit in that movie that I love that it's on here. But again, like it's two Star Wars movies. At least you have the right one higher.
Yeah. No, I agree. I don't know.
Yeah.
And then we have Alien at number 2, which we already had Aliens. And you and I are in agreement. I think Aliens is the better sci-fi movie.
Yeah.
But you got Alien up here, and I will note also no Predator movies at all.
Yeah, very strange.
Yeah.
Predator. You can make the discussion for Predator versus Prey, I think, on any kind of list right now. I think they're both very, very good.
Uh-huh.
The other middle movie Predators are fine in their own right, but they
The
definitely
Predators
get
is fine,
weird.
yeah.
Yeah, they get weird at times. But,
Yeah.
I mean, Alien, I guess, putting that near the top is fine. It's got some good sci-fi. It kind of really launches Sigourney Weaver into being that Ellen Ripley that is that, anti-hero hero through all these series of movies that she comes through after. And there's some definite horror aspects in there with, the xenomorph, and there's a lot of good stuff, but it's slow.
It is slow. It takes a long time to get going. It's the movie that has more of the sci-fi setup. So if you wanted an Alien movie on here, you go with this one, not the second one.
Right.
If you wanted the movie on here though, because you wanted some more representation of sci-fi horror, then you put The Thing on here instead, which is number 11 on this list. I didn't touch upon that, but I knew I was going to get around to it.
Oh man.
Yeah, Aliens plus The Thing, and you've got all the coverage you need. I don't think you need Alien at that point, but they decided they needed Alien and Aliens, and I hard disagree with that decision.
Yeah, it's a fine movie. It's fine. It's good.
Fine.
It's really good, but it should not be higher than its counterpart. No.
And this is one that's going to get me some hate, but I understand why Blade Runner is on here. I don't like this movie. It's especially not for number 1.
I feel like this movie has just like it's a good movie too. Again, it's fine. I feel like the whole thing that makes this movie anywhere near the top of any list is the buzz around it over the last several years about like, is he a replicant? Is he not a replicant? It kind of made the movie like, relevant again. And then Blade Runner, like 2049, I didn't see, came out a couple years ago, and I guess kind of picked up where this one left off, I suppose. But I feel like the lore of this Blade Runner movie has made it, overachieve, I think I would say, in its placement on some lists, especially on a list where it makes number 1. I just don't. There's just too many other better movies out there.
Well, and that's my issue. Is you will note what we have on here: 2 Aliens, 2 Star Wars, a Terminator, a Back to the Future, a bunch of very expected blockbusters.
Yeah.
But what's not on here? There's no Star Trek.
Yeah.
Like like Star Trek II: Wrath of Khan or Star Trek VI: Undiscovered Country. Either of those would have been perfectly acceptable on this list. I wouldn't have fought which one you wanted on here. One of them. One representation of that. And then where's the Planet of the Apes movies, which were the biggest sci-fi blockbusters for like an entire decade? Like if you want to represent blockbusters, this is again why this is a Gen X list right here. Planet of the Apes isn't on here at all, and those are fantastic. So what were they thinking? What are some other sci-fi movies you would have put on here instead? Do you have any?
I mean, I'm looking at like what else you have. The Close Encounters, I liked that one a lot.
Yeah, that was a good one.
I would have said The Thing. I'm glad it was number 11 at least. It got close. The fact it's not in the top 10 at all, like maybe it's my bias, but I feel cheated in a way.
No, I agree.
I mean, I'll get out of like left field a little bit here, and I'll throw like the sport element in. I've heard a reference one time made about the movie Rocky, that what's more realistic as a movie, Rocky or Star Wars. I think they asked Floyd Mayweather this, an actual boxer, and Floyd Mayweather said that Star Wars is more realistic than Rocky. So I would put Rocky almost like a sci-fi movie, because there's no way that you have that great white hope come out here and lay out Apollo Creed like that. But I mean, that was. I can't think of anything offhand. maybe I'm just still trying to sift through what we looked at here. But I
Well,
mean, The Thing definitely belongs on there. I don't know why it's not.
going over some of the other stuff on this list, there's some that I just don't agree with at all. They have Donnie Darko on the list at all, which that's not sci-fi. That's just fucked up.
No,
I like the film.
that's suspense. It's a
Yeah,
suspense movie.
I
Come
like that
on.
film, but it's not really sci-fi. It's something else weird altogether. Snowpiercer is on their list, which is actually a fantastic sci-fi
That's a
movie.
good one.
Yeah,
That's a good one. I didn't
really
think
good
of
one.
that. I didn't see that till it was on like, Netflix or whatever. I came
Hmm.
across it a couple years ago, and I'm like, oh, this is right after Chris Evans was doing Captain America. And I'm like, oh, I like him. I'll watch this movie. And that was like unexpectedly good, right?
Yeah, it's really good. It is action, but it's all
Yeah.
built on its own sci-fi premise, so that it works and it's tense the whole way through.
Yeah, it's very apocalyptic feel. The world has had all this stuff happen, and humanity's last survival is on this train. We cannot leave it because we'll freeze to death outside. But then you
Hmm.
find out like that's not true at the end. Like what
Maybe
else you've
not.
been
Yep.
lying about? Like
Yep.
it's crazy. It's a good movie.
It is. Eternal Sunshine of the Spotless Mind is on the list, which I like. I like that movie. I don't know that I like it for sci-fi. It's very science fantasy, you know?
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's an interesting one. But I mean, there's a couple artsy movies. I
Yeah.
guess if you want to go down that route,
Yeah.
okay.
Invasion of the Body Snatchers, I would have somewhere higher on this list. They have it at number 40. That we're talking the 1970s one with Donald Sutherland.
Yeah,
That is
that's a
a
really good one.
great movie. Should be higher on the list. Uh,
Yeah, I agree.
yeah, 12 Monkeys. Where's 12 Monkeys on the top 10?
Oh, yeah, Bruce
That's
Willis. But speaking of that, Fifth Element.
right.
How about
Fifth
that? That's
Element.
a great movie that's not on here. But back to 12 Monkeys, like that's a great movie too. But again, I guess that's very I don't know. The the medical aspect maybe
Hmm.
makes it feel less sci-fi, I guess, with the virus or whatever,
No,
but that's pretty science fiction, right?
it's
I mean,
so
come on.
science fiction. Time
Right?
travel and trying to prevent a virus that he causes, and time loops and everything else. Like that is absolutely sci-fi.
Yeah, I gotta believe that, right?
Yeah.
That's the way I feel, for
That'd be up
sure.
on my list. The Fly isn't on here, the 1986 one, which is actually very much sci-fi and body
Yeah.
horror.
Very body horror, very Cronenberg, very classic Cronenberg there. The
Hmm.
the Jeff Goldblum kills it. Gina Davis does fantastic. That's a great movie too.
Yep. Planet of the Apes does make 24 on their list, but I think that's still like,
It
There's
feels a little low to me.
Jurassic Park or Guardians of the Galaxy. Like, there aren't a lot of Marvel movies I would put on a sci-fi list, but Guardians of the Galaxy I actually would.
I think that yeah, I could buy that. Yeah.
Hmm.
I tilted my head a little bit when you said that, and then I thought about it for a second. If you're
Hmm.
gonna put a Marvel movie on here, like I mean, I guess you can maybe think Ant-Man, I suppose, with the Pym particles and all the science-ness of that, but I think Guardians fits a little bit better into what we're trying to do here.
Most of the Marvel movies are definitely like sci-fi premise but superhero, but Guardians of the
Yeah,
Galaxy is sci-fi.
yeah,
It's goofy Star Warsy sci-fi, but you put two Star Wars movies on here. Where's one of the Guardians of the Galaxy movies?
yeah. Well, where's the Star Trek? I mean,
Right?
to your point, like we talked about earlier.
And then what I would actually have as my number one sci-fi movie, because it is straight up hardish sci-fi with a fantastic premise to it. Arrival.
Oh, who's
The
that?
talk, the
Jodie
alien movie, all about like Amy Adams talking to
Amy
aliens.
Adams, yes, where it's
Yes.
like the whole yeah, that
Yeah.
I saw that once and I gotta watch it again. I remember it being really good. I was
Really
thinking,
good.
yeah, the Jodie Foster one too. I was
Contact.
thinking of Contact. That's the one that popped in my
But
head first.
that's
Yeah,
not even on their list. Contact
yeah.
is a movie I would expect to have on a top 50. Didn't even make Empire's list at all. I'm like, what is that? But
Mm.
Arrival should be near the top, if not the top, because that was just a brilliant sci-fi movie.
I'm gonna have to watch that again. I
Hmm.
remember enjoying it, but I'm gonna have to watch it again. I'll
So
leave it at that.
I have serious qualms with the Empire list. I think the Empire list is wrong for like all but maybe two or three entries.
I don't know. We said it at the beginning. Yeah, I can agree with about maybe four of
Yeah.
these things. I can Alien and Aliens like okay, one, but I mean you got two. Okay, Star Wars again. We have two on here. One, there's two. Terminator. Okay, is three. I
Like,
guess.
as someone who grew up in the 80s and the 90s, I feel like most of the items on their list, were movies they grew up with.
Yeah.
And then there was The Matrix, which was like at that peak point where when you were just adult enough to go see R-rated movies, you went and saw that and it blew your mind. And then
Mhm.
because your dad always watched Close Encounters of the Third Kind, you watched that too. So all of those things on the list basically are populated by what was fun when I was growing up. And
Yeah.
and a lot of really good sci-fi just didn't make their cut, like especially not their top 10 because it didn't suit their rose-colored glasses list.
And I really want to know who had final say. And like,
Right.
it's a good movie, but why is Blade Runner #1?
Why?
What
Why?
makes that better than Alien?
I would have thought it less if they'd had it at number 10, but I'm really
Yeah.
confounded by it at number 1.
Well, I asked you that. Like, is this in what order is this list?
Yeah.
You said it to me, and
Yeah.
because I mean, I guess I could have seen ET as a #1 depending on what kind of list you're talking about. I mean, I disagree.
I mean, it made
hard,
a lot of
but I
money,
mean,
I
sure.
guess. Yeah. Yeah.
No.
Anyway, this has been Not So Live from Asteroid G, taking a time loop to try and fix this list. I'm Mike Finkelstein.
Hey, I'm just gonna go and wipe the taste of this list out of my mouth. Actually, I'm like the goodbye.
E.T. phone better list.
I'm gonna go buy some Reese's Pieces to cleanse this.
We will see you all next time.